Hello and welcome to the Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Jerry Knowles, representing the 124th District, which includes a portion of Berks and a portion of Schuylkill counties. In early December of 2012, Michigan became the 24th right-to-work state, meaning that workers will not be required to pay union dues in order to keep their jobs. It was a stunning event in a state known for its manufacturing base and strong union influence. The question before us is there enough momentum to make the same change in Pennsylvania? It's a change that I believe holds great economic possibilities for our Commonwealth. Joining me to discuss this topic and a package of legislation called the Pennsylvania Open Workforce Initiative is Representative Daryl Metcalfe from Butler County. Chairman Metcalfe, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jerry.
Mr. Chairman, I think what we'll do is, before we get into a dialogue, I think we'll look at some of the highlights of a press event that we held here at the Capitol today. Is that okay?
That's a great idea. Good morning. I'm State Representative Daryl Metcalfe, and today all of these folks are joining me to announce the introduction of the Pennsylvania Open Workforce Initiative. You'll hear from several of my colleagues. You'll hear from many individuals from the private sector on why Pennsylvania should become a right-to-work state. It's a common sense policy that costs taxpayers $0, but makes a lot of sense. And by looking at the statistics of right-to-work states is a proven economic generator that will help Pennsylvania to create the jobs that tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians need to have created so they can gain employment again. We're going to restore a basic freedom to workers and create a job engine through right to work.
Thank you very much and good morning. My name is Jerry Knowles. I'm the state representative from the 124th Legislative District, which encompasses a portion of Berks and a portion of Schuylkill County. It is indeed great to be here today, and it's evident by the turnout as to the passion for this issue. And I look forward to working with this team behind me to make compulsory unionism a thing of the past in Pennsylvania. There's not much that hasn't been said. When you're just far down on the roster, there's not a lot that hasn't been said. But I do want to say that my bill is basically the same as the umbrella bill, and that basically deals with the private sector, and it would give the choice of people in the private sector as to whether or not they want to belong to a meeting or a union. One interesting note in doing some research, from 2010 to 2012, manufacturing jobs in this country, now we're talking manufacturing jobs, 2010 to 2012. There was an increase of 700,000 non-union jobs. That's 700,000 non-union jobs, while there was a decrease in that same period of 60,000 union jobs. That is a fact. I want to issue this challenge to the union bosses. Prove your worth. Prove your worth. Give your members an opportunity to make a choice. It's a choice that they should have. It's a God-given choice as to whether or not they want to join a union. In closing, I again thank you all for coming out today, and I look forward to working with all of you to make this legislation a reality. Well, Mr. Chairman, that was, we're having quite an exciting day here at the Capitol. A lot of good things going on here, and one of the things that I find very exciting is the fact that you asked me to join with the team of legislators in dealing with an issue that, our right to work issue. And I'm working with you on this legislation, and maybe you just want to give us a little overview of the legislation. And
Sure. Yeah, well, I was certainly very appreciative of your call. I think it was back in December when you and I talked. And I've told a lot of people that after the activity occurred in Michigan and following Indiana's activity, where we saw Indiana move in the right-to-work direction, we saw Michigan become a right-to-work state. States that traditionally people would have thought would have went the way of the unions rather than the way of the people in what their demands were. So it was good to see both of those states, and many of us have been hopeful for many years that we could move Pennsylvania in this direction of a right-to-work policy for our state. And basically what that does is ensure that we don't have compulsory unionism. Now, by technicality, somebody can't be forced to be in a union, but by default, they are. Because in Pennsylvania, if you want to work at a certain place of employment and they are a unionized workplace, then you have to either become a member of that union or you have to pay a portion of their dues, even if you're a non-member. So folks are forced to pay dues to an organization of which they choose not to be a member if they're non-union members. And we heard during the press conference that we had that there are thousands of Pennsylvanians that choose not to be in the union but are being forced to pay what they call a fair share due, which is very unfair in my opinion because it's not just. No American should have to pay to a group, no American should be forced to associate with a group just in order to have a job to provide for their family.
And I found it to be a very exciting day, and I think that what we're doing here on this show and what we're doing in terms of that press event, I had a lady that approached me, and she had seen that there was some mention of it in the newspaper regarding what was going to take place today, and she had mentioned to me that I don't support that, and well, why don't you support it? Well, you're trying to kill unions. I said, no, we're not trying to kill unions. And when I explained it to her, her response was, this makes sense. What's the big deal? So this was a woman who thought it was a bad idea until she got all of the facts. Daryl, let me ask you, I guess after it happened in Michigan, I mean, from what they tell me, people have said to me, they've commended me for becoming a part of this team and this package of, I think it's a total of 6 bills, but they said, Jerry, this is good stuff, but are you going to be able to make it happen? What's your feel on that?
Well, previous sessions, and that's what I was starting to say at the beginning of the last answer that I gave you, was that when you called me in December, I was also contacted by 2 other members of the Pennsylvania legislature. And I don't think I've ever had calls from colleagues in the past at the beginning of a session to say, when are you introducing right to work, and pretty much how can we help? And I appreciate your offer to help because it allowed us to expand the package. We have yourself involved in supporting one of the bills, sponsoring one of the bills, Representative Kathy Rapp and Fred Keller, Jim Cox, myself, sponsoring some of the bills, Representative Steve Bloom. So we have more and more members that are joining together to push this. So the more members that are involved, the better the chances of success. The more activity at the grassroots level, of course, the better chance of success. In 2005, we saw a very self-serving piece of legislation passed, and that was to give pay raises to legislators, along with other members of the executive branch, judicial branch, and pretty much across the board. When we saw that vote take place, we saw outrage at the grassroots level, and we saw people become active across the state to demand that their legislators repeal that pay raise that they saw as unjust. This, by poll numbers across the state, across the country, the majority of Americans don't believe that somebody should be forced to join a union or forced to have default union membership through being forced to pay dues to a union. So I think based on the activity that you mentioned in Michigan, in Indiana, the activity that we're seeing in the legislature, I think our chances are better than ever to get this common sense policy passed, because it's a policy that we can pass that costs the taxpayers $0. There's zero cost, but it makes a lot of sense because you see in areas where they have this policy, when you look at statistics, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, in a 10-year time frame from 2001-2011, private sector job growth in compulsory unionism states decreased by 3.4%, while the private sector job growth in right-to-work states increased by 2.4%. So you see in right-to-work states, you're seeing more jobs created. In compulsory unionism states, you see fewer jobs created, actually a decrease in job creation. You're seeing more people dependent on welfare. And you're seeing fewer people with private sector health insurance in forced union states. in compulsory unionism states. So this is a common sense policy, and I think we have some momentum coming out of Michigan's success, and I think with your support and some of our other colleagues that are supporting it now, I think we have a better shot than ever. And we just need the citizens to rise up and tell, like they did with a pay raise, we want this unjust situation corrected.
Yeah, and you know, just to simplify it a little bit, I did a little bit of research myself, and it basically manufacturing jobs, and this really jumped out at me when I saw this. From 2010 to 2012, there was an increase of 700,000 non-union jobs in this country. That's 700,000 non-union jobs, an increase. During that same period of time, there was a decrease of 60,000 union jobs. Now that just tells you a little bit about how important this is. Just very briefly, it's a package, I believe, of 6 bills. And I think many of the bills are like, I mean, my bill, that being House Bill 54, is very similar to your bill. It's very similar to the umbrella bill. It deals specifically with private business. But
right. We have an umbrella bill which would say if this bill is enacted, all of Pennsylvania's economy will be right to work. That means that nobody that works in Pennsylvania will be forced to pay union dues just to have a job. We have other incremental pieces of that package where we would take certain sectors of the economy and make that sector right to work. And that's basically what Indiana did by the understanding that I have, is that I think they just went with a bill like yours that said the private sector will be right to work. We have several other bills, one that says school employees will be right to work. We have one that says state employees will be right to work. We have one that says local municipal employees will be right to work employees. So we have several bills in the package. Then we have Steve Bloom's bill that says that public employees who choose to leave a union wouldn't have to wait for this escape time that's built into the collective bargaining kind of agreement in the law. So under current law, if you're a public employee and you're in a union, you can't escape that union membership until 15 days before that expires. So we believe that if an American chooses that they don't want to be in a union anymore, then they should be able to get out at any time during that collective bargaining agreement. The rest of the folks that want to stay in the union, that's fine. But an individual that says, hey, this union's not representing me well anymore, you know, they're representing political issues that I don't believe in. They're supporting candidates that I don't support. They're using the money that they're collecting from me in ways that I don't choose for them to use it. They should have a choice in determining that, and they should be able to get out of the union if they choose to at any time.
And I think that's what scares the union. I mean, I've had I've had a number of people, some teachers. I have some teacher friends that have approached me and basically said that they don't want to belong to the union, and they're in a situation where they don't have that choice. And they think this is a good idea. What are the unions so afraid of?
Well, I think mainly it's the union bosses that are afraid, because if they don't have the forced compulsory unionism situation, if they don't have the government to act as their enforcer, then union members will be able to hold them more accountable. If union members can choose to leave at any time, then they can hold the union bosses accountable. If union members can choose to take their dues with them and walk, then they can hold those union bosses accountable. And right now, there is no accountability, for the most part, between union members and their leadership. They have elections, but you see how elections go. We've seen some of the historic union bosses, the Hoffas and others over the years. There's the intimidation tactics that these unions use. Union members need to be able to hold those union bosses accountable, and I think that's the ones who really fear it. And then they inject misinformation into their membership, because I think, like you explained to that lady that you mentioned, when somebody understands that all we're asking for is a policy that says the government will not require that you have to pay an organization to have a job. The government will not require that you have to associate with a group of people that you otherwise would not choose to associate with just to feed your family. So I mean, it's a very basic American freedom that we want to restore. And right to work has been embraced in about half the states in the country now.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it is really a no-brainer. I just don't quite get it. I think it's very simple, and that is, people have, it's a right to choice.
Right.
It's their God-given right to decide whether or not they want to belong to a union.
That's exactly right.
I mean, this this forced mandated union, it's definitely got to go. You know, Daryl, what I really was impressed with, I mean, when I came to this event today, I expected to see legislators there, but I did not expect to see the cross-section of people. I mean, I want to tip my hat to you in putting that together. That was such it was such a variety of people from different walks of life. And
well, I appreciate the tip of the hat, but you know, my staff worked hard to help bring this program together today. But really, the hat's tipped to all of those individuals across Pennsylvania that are willing to step forward and show the courage that's needed to lead on this issue, because we've had business leaders there. We had a teacher at the press conference that stepped out and put himself at risk, speaking out against the forced unionism policy that we have in Pennsylvania. We had former school board members. We have citizens that are willing to step up and lead, and that's what we need. We need, if people do not like what they're getting from their government, then we need more citizens, more patriotic citizens to get involved, and that's what people were doing today. We had business leaders, as you said. We had leaders, former school board directors from our school districts. So we had a wide variety of people. We had about 19 speakers today, including legislators, at that press conference. But there are people across the state, thousands, that can tell stories of how they're being forced to pay money that they could use for a pair of shoes for their child, to put more food on the table, to put more heat in the house, to put more gas in the gas tank to get to work. People are being forced to pay money to a union they don't want to belong to. That's not right. That's not American. And our government needs to get out of the business of being an enforcer for the unions in Pennsylvania.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit about your responsibilities as chairman of the House State Government Committee, as well as legislation that I recently signed onto, and that is the Right to Bear Arms Protection Act. So we will talk about that when we come back, and legislative report will return in a few moments.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual, and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Welcome back to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Jerry Knowles. Today's topic is the possibility of Pennsylvania becoming a right-to-work state. My guest is Representative Daryl Metcalfe from Butler County. Chairman Metcalfe, I think, unless you have something more to add about the right to work, I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk about, we okay with right to work? I think we covered it pretty well.
I think we covered the basics very well.
Yeah. I have been, I think, if memory serves me correctly, this is my 3rd term serving on State Government Committee. I got to tell you, it was one of my top picks. I genuinely,
Thank you.
I genuinely enjoy it. It's a great group of good conservative legislators, and how are you finding being the chairman and comparisons? And we all know the difference between the majority and the minority, but you want to just share a little bit with us on that?
I'd much rather be a member of the majority and a majority chairman. And as a majority chairman, I'm allowed to set the schedule for the committee. The majority leader sets the schedule for the floor of the House, and the majority chairman sets the schedule for the committee activity. So legislation is directed to various committees across the House throughout the legislative session, depending on what that legislation does. And we have the Education Committee. Of course, they receive education bills. We have the Finance Committee that receives the bills dealing with tax code. The State Government Committee is a committee that you and I serve on together. And the State Government Committee, we have a very broad range that we can actually work on, a very diverse grouping of pieces of legislation. We ran performance budgeting last year. We ran about a half a dozen bills trying to deal with the illegal alien problem that we have in our state and in our nation. Of course, here in Pennsylvania, we have people impacted by over $1 billion because of the illegal aliens that are in our state. So we need to fix that problem. We need to protect Americans' lives, liberty, and property through enacting some of these pieces of legislation. We passed the voter ID bill last session. We passed the new congressional redistricting, which was a historic type of piece of legislation. It's done every 10 years. We had responsibility for that. We passed regulatory reform to try and help our job creators create more jobs and ensure that the regulatory burden isn't too much on them. So we're going to have a lot of issues before us this session dealing with the integrity in the election place. We've seen a lot of reports on what's happened in Philadelphia. We saw Republican inspectors that were not allowed to be seated by Democrat judges of elections down there to actually make sure that things were being conducted properly with integrity. So we're going after that issue this session. We expect to try and move on some legislation and working with the majority leader and the leadership team to do that. We have pension reform on the docket. We're expecting pension reform bills to come our way. We have regulatory reform issues. We're going to take another shot at trying to get legislation passed that stops illegal aliens from getting public benefits here in Pennsylvania. So we have a lot of big issues that we're going to be tackling, and we have a great lineup on the membership side with yourself and many other conservatives, as you said, from the Republican caucus. And we intend to run a very conservative schedule of bills, one that's working to protect taxpayers here in Pennsylvania. So it's a real blessing for me to have an opportunity to work with you and others as the chairman. We have great staff that are working with us on that committee in my office that are helping us to move this schedule along. And we would appreciate hearing from your constituents and others that have thoughts and ideas for us to improve policies here in Pennsylvania to protect their freedom.
Yeah, it's kind of strange because I had a passion, and you knew that because I spoke to you about it regarding the voter ID. And it was just, again, a no-brainer. It's kind of funny because the opponents of that bill made it sound like the world was going to end.
Right.
And most of the precincts that I checked in with, and the reaction that I got was that things went rather smoothly. You know, we would have liked to have seen it kicked in, but we did the trial run. Now I think we're ready to go. But I think that you and I will agree there absolutely, positively is a need for that legislation.
Oh, there is. We need to ensure that we have integrity in our election process. You know, so many men and women have given their lives, have laid their lives on the line to protect our Constitution, to protect our American way of life that's defined, that's affirmed in our U.S. Constitution. And the foundation of that is for our people to be able to elect representatives in this great constitutional republic that we've been blessed with to ensure that our freedoms continue to be passed on to the next generation and beyond. So we have to ensure that we have integrity in that election process. If we lose the integrity in our election process, we will lose our nation. And we have individuals that are working to use foreign nationals to corrupt the system. We saw foreign nationals voting in last year's primary. It was documented by one of our commissioners that oversee elections in Philadelphia. We've seen people voting that weren't registered to vote. We've had investigators out in the past that had determined that we had people coming in from out of state to try and influence our elections here in Pennsylvania. So we need to ensure that we have integrity in our election process. And right now, the focus for myself and some of my staff is looking at what happened in the most recent election in Philadelphia, especially across the state. But Philadelphia is a very problemed area of our state with the way elections have been conducted. You shouldn't allow relatives to serve with relatives to create accountability. And that's what we're hearing stories of judges of election hiring a brother or sister, brother-in-law, sister-in-law to be the inspector for their work. And that's not right. That's a lack of integrity, and we need to fix it.
We have about 2 minutes left, and I just feel that we need to touch on an issue that's so important to both you and I, and that is your legislation in dealing with the right to bear arms, and that would be your Right to Bear Arms Protection Act. I mean, I just commend you for introducing that bill. You know, I was somewhat saddened by the fact as to way people who don't want us to have the right to bear arms, people who just don't think it's right.
Like the president.
Well, yeah, that's a good example. But the point is, they took advantage of a very, very sad situation that we all felt very bad about. Right. And now they're using it to promote this liberal agenda of taking your guns away from you. And
well, that's what my wife had mentioned, how horrifying it is that the left is acting in this way, that they are trying to utilize these horrific acts against fellow citizens, these murderous acts. They're trying to capitalize on those, and instead of focusing on the criminal who's committed these murders, on those wicked individuals that have perpetrated these crimes against their neighbor, they're focusing on law-abiding citizens and trying to steal our rights as a result of it. And these are people that have been for disarming America, many of them. So we need to stand up as state legislators for the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, for Article 1, Section 21 to the Pennsylvania Constitution that's drafted even stronger than the Second Amendment, to say that our right to bear arms and defense of ourselves in the state shall not be questioned. And we need to stand up for that, and that's what we're doing in this legislation, is to say that any future laws coming out of Washington, D.C., I don't care if it's from Congress, if it's from executive order from Obama, or if it's from a judicial activist down there, that we will not allow them to be enforced here in Pennsylvania, that we will prosecute any law enforcement officer that's working to try and take away the rights of our citizens. We will prosecute them under felony charges if they try and enforce any of these new gun-grabbing items that Washington might be trying to advance against our people. We need to stand up for the rights of our citizens, the God-given rights to defend themselves, to defend their property, to defend their families, to defend their state, to defend their country. And we need to ensure that our right to bear arms in defense of ourselves in the state is not questioned by anybody in D.C. So our legislation would create a felony offense for anyone who would try and enforce any of Obama's executive orders or new congressional action that he might try and push through, or any judicial activists out of D.C. that might be trying to take away our rights.
Well, it's so important that people contact their legislators.
It is.
And on all the issues we talked about, it's just so important that we do that, because I try to impress upon my constituents. I read my emails, I read my letters, I answer my phone calls. And I want to know what my constituents are thinking, because then that kind of gives me some direction. Right. And it also gives me some reinforcement that indeed I'm doing what's right.
But we need that grassroots activity to move some of the other legislators that you and I work with. We need their constituents to contact them, and it doesn't hurt to have constituents across the state that are affected by these policies contacting legislators, multiple legislators, along with the governor's office, as you said.
Very good. Well, it just seems, it's hard to believe how quickly the time goes by. But Daryl, I want to certainly thank you for coming in today and for spending some time with me and sharing. Thank you for the job that you do as our Majority Chairman for the House State Government Committee.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to share with your constituents also.
And I appreciate it. That's all the time we have for today's program. If you have any questions about any of the issues that we discussed today, please contact me at one of my local offices. That information will be on the screen in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for another edition of Legislative Report.